Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm sorry we're running a little bit late. I hope the emergency debate was enjoyable. I've heard that Trump lost, so we're now going to have a crack at persuading you of something slightly less right-wing. If you could change your mind from the emergency debate, that would be brilliant. I really don't want to lose. Thanks. I won't keep things going on too much longer. I won't do an introduction of any sort, but you all know that this is the moment at which we hand over to the new terms team. I hope you've enjoyed Lent term. It has only been possible because of the most fantastic committee who've worked alongside me, and many of them have been involved for several terms now. Some of them have been here for upwards of 2 years, putting on events for you guys, so I hope you're as grateful to them as I am. So handing over as executive officer, who got her name forgotten last time, so I promise I've remembered, is Catherine Regler, handing over to Catherine Dunbar.
Woo! Aww.
Queens, Joshua Ellis passes on to Matteo Violet Vianello.
Nice name.
Handing over as treasurer, Charlotte Petter is replaced by Leila Gumuzdis. Handing over as Ents officer, Ash Nandy is replaced by Paige Naomi Satterthwaite. And finally, it's the last time you will hear me say goodbye, because I'm handing over to one of my very dear friends, Charlotte Ivers.
Almost introduced you as number one, B-Nick.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honour for the first time to welcome you tonight to the Cambridge Union Society and to tonight's debate. This House believes the Conservatives have been unfairly demonised. If you're joining us online tonight, the hashtag is CUS Tory Scum. It's a new era, James, that's all I'm going to say. And you can tweet us with your comments and questions, and if there's time, then I will read them out. If you're in the chamber, which many of you are, thank you, then how to interrupt the debate is on the back of your order papers, which you can have a look at. And there will also be a round of questions and floor speeches between the first and second pair of speakers. So, onwards to the debate. Tonight we debate, this House believes the Conservatives have been unfairly demonised, and our first speaker is Mr. James Hutt. Now, his biography here tells me, and he promises he didn't write it, that he hopes that this motion will enhance and not harm his career prospects, which is, frankly, something I wish quite the opposite of. I've been told that it's a tradition that the incoming president has to make jokes about the outgoing president's sex life in their introduction, so I can only apologise to his dad and stepmom who are here tonight. All I will say is that it is fantastic to see James leaning right for once when certain parts of his body are said to lean left. And without further ado, I think it's time we welcome Mr. James Hutt.
My body was not even cold yet. It's just struck me, sat there, how much I regret introducing all of our student debaters this term by telling you they could persuade you of either side of the motion. Because now I'm faced with the chance, persuading you of just one seems like more than enough. I've also learned that it is fashionable during a speech to weave something throughout your speech. Usually people do rebuttal, but I insisted on speaking first, so I didn't have to to think on my feet. So I'm going to weave gratitude for you, all the members, and for my committee through my speech, because I know that most of you have taught me a lot, you've challenged my views, You've helped me, and you provided a truly incredible space that is so much more than a centre of free speech that we're told it is. It is a centre of free disengagement, of challenge, and of learning. So thank you very much for being with me for that. Before I begin, I need to thank one person specifically, both because of how fantastic she is, and because she disagrees with absolutely everything that I'm about to say, and therefore doesn't want to be associated with it. Charlotte, you've been fantastic support this term, as have all of your team. You've been a great friend for many years, long before we both got involved in this union stuff. Your skills as a hockey player are doubtful, but the fact that you're going to be an amazing president is not. Have an amazing term. I know you'll enjoy it, and I know you'll be great. So, to the debate. Right, first up, I've also got to apologise to my dad. He's in tonight, having watched me have my drug habits questioned by Lord Adebowale earlier in term, and now he's going to hear me use the phrase, "fuck Tory scum," liberally throughout my speech. For this, I'm going to say I have absolutely no responsibility, because it was the other side that said it first. But we've got to use it. We've got to talk about the exact language that's being used, because this debate is about language. It's about rhetoric. It's about the way that the narrative of the Conservative Party is told. The opposition are going to stand up. A front bench Labour minister is going to stand up and tell you about policy mistakes. Sure, every government has some policy mistakes, but that's not the accusation they're here tonight to defend. To win this debate, they have to justify to you the fairness of the political rhetoric that's used when members of the left brand the Conservatives as actively malicious, elitist, and cruel. To actively homogenise and demonise an entire party with a moral superiority that completely fails to represent the majority of voters. When protesters accuse the Conservatives of fixing the election because they decide first past the post isn't good enough anymore, or when it's suddenly fine to call Conservative voters murderers, or when delegations to conference are subject to verbal and physical abuse, when you use a picture of a champagne going into Downing Street and use it to typify classic Tory excesses, till you find out that it was going into Gordon Brown's Downing Street, and it was taken in 2004. And when we have Labour frontbenchers in the run-up to the election stand up and tell us that the Tories are sending us back to the misery of the Victorian workhouse, that's the burden on opposition. Opposition have got to justify that language that it's fair, and there's no way they can do it. Of course they can't. The language used by the left to characterise and in many ways caricature the Conservatives, they're short-sighted attempts. It's reactionary, reacting against policies and actions that take decades to have an effect. It's easy to identify problems in the moment. None of us on any side of the House want to see the use of food banks increase. But it's so much harder to accurately assess whether a pound spent now that's repaid in the future is good value. Every decision a politician takes is a difficult one. It's made even more difficult by the fact you've got a media watching on every single word, ready to twist what you say. And this is why proper debate and discussion about policy, its impact, evidence-based lawmaking, and genuine discussion about results are necessary. There are very real arguments to be made against the crippling future generations with national debt. First and foremost, it puts them in an even more difficult position than we are in now, where decisions tougher than those currently taken must be made by future generations. It might be easy to point out the immediate effects when the next elections are just 12 months away, but the burden on our politicians is to look at every impact for the current generation and the next. This is why absolute judgments like one party is scum are unjustified. There are real arguments on both sides. But, and I'm going to be a bit partisan, the right will characteristically criticise Labour's policies as naive, ill-thought-through, ineffective. But they'll criticise the policies. The rhetoric we hear back from the left is that these decisions are immoral, ill-intentioned. We're looking at politics of personality and not the politics of effect. Yeah, go for it, Jamie. Do you want to wait for a microphone? I can't even hear you, sorry.
Jamie Bamber, Pembroke College. You talk a lot about the importance of debating policies rather than just using insults. And while I agree with that, I think it's hypocritical to try and mount the Conservatives as the party that stands on policies and mount, as it were, Labour Party or the opposition's party using insult, when historically the Conservative Party have been often one to resort to a negative campaigning, and even in the most recent election, they are certainly not above using smear campaign and general allegations.
Sure, this isn't an attack on negative campaigning, although it would be nice if we didn't have it.
But you're
It's an
trying to
attack on the
pretend
type of
that only
campaign.
the
It's an
Conservatives
attack on whether
are
you're questioning
spurious.
someone's morals, whether you're questioning someone's integrity, or whether you're standing up and saying that I think you have a different view of the way the world works
So
to me, and that's fine.
So when the Conservative Party criticised Ed Miliband, saying he was a terrible leader, and used these kind of, in the last election, attempted to say that, oh, the Labour government, they're terrible economics, oh, all these difficult decisions, oh, they totally caused the economic crisis. Do you agree that was wrong?
I don't agree that was wrong. Pointing out that someone's made wrong decisions is not the same as questioning their integrity. Because it goes beyond holding a debate. It goes beyond how we hold the debate. It goes beyond the type of campaign tactics we use. There is an arrogance in the way that the left hold the moral high ground. Only their intentions are true. Only they have the correct answer. And those that disagree are at best stupid, at worst malicious, as if, what, the left's way of thinking is somehow trivially true. Think of the shock that went round on May the 8th. That's in there for you. Think of the shock that went round on May the 8th. People didn't think it'd be true. The great British public couldn't possibly disagree with the left. It must be a fix. There were protests sort of against democracy, which was a bit unfortunate. But the demonisation of the right has lulled some people into the belief that they're morally superior, that they alone know best, and that surely everyone will go along with them for the ride. Think of the number of people who will tell you, so I haven't faced you guys at all, think of the number of people who will tell you they hate the Tories, like it's some kind of badge, like it's some kind of pride thing. We don't say we hate Labour. We say we disagree with Labour. We say we think they're wrong. But hating someone is very different. Perhaps nowhere is this more clear, this sort of disbelief, this arrogance, than when we're discussing Tories, Labour, and working class voters. Historical voting lines have broken down. That is a fact. At the last election, 27% of working class voters voted Tory, a little bit behind the 41% who voted Labour. But at the C2 socioeconomic group, it was 32% apiece. 61% of UKIP supporters are working class. Yet still we hear from the left that we've got it wrong, that it's a great deception by the press, that voters are being conned, that these voters are completely unable to think or decide what's best for themselves. And that is nothing but disgusting arrogance and snobbery. Why are those of us who believe in a different economic model, where aspirations are encouraged, the state leaves you be and doesn't spend money it doesn't have, why can't this be an informed choice, just a different one to your own? There's an interesting dichotomy, though, that comes when it is about one of your own. Labour MPs were vilified last year when we had the vote on action in Syria. The same vocal minorities were behind it, the same emotive language, the same threats. And it's why you don't have to be a Conservative to vote with Prop today. You don't have to be a Conservative to side with the motion. Because there were many Labour supporters who voted for action in Syria and subsequently received threats and verbal attacks. One MP reportedly was sent a picture of a dead baby. Another had to leave the chamber to check her staff were okay when her office had been raided by protesters. The vitriol of those who opposed military intervention was unleashed on all those who supported it, regardless of party lines. And Corbyn, himself an opponent of intervention, was asked for his views on this. He said, "Abuse has no part in responsible democratic political dialogue," and I believe that very strongly. That is the way I wish to conduct myself, and I wish others to conduct themselves in that way. There's something profoundly cruel about demonising a person for their democratic choices, when political debate is substituted for personal attacks. It's even more shocking when normal people, 11 million of them, are the targets and not politicians. When this happens, we're giving way to a politics of fear and hatred. So I'm going to quote Corbyn again, who said, "With democratic debate comes with responsibilities. The responsibility of respect for others, even if they don't agree with you." I'll be honest, when I set the motion, I never thought I would quote Corbyn quite so much as I have in this debate. But I agree with him, wholeheartedly. So my question for the opposition, and to Mr. Burnham in particular, is why don't you?
Thank you very much, James. I would now like to introduce our second speaker for the night, first speaker in opposition. Jonty Leibowitz is the campaigns officer for the Cambridge University's Labour Club and a second-year historian at Sydney Sussex College. Jonty.
Are you timing out? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real honor to be speaking here at the Union today, and I am something, I hasten to admit, something of a warm-up act for the speakers I have after you on the opposition. I was only asked to do this speech on Tuesday evening, so you'll have to bear with my sometimes inane ramblings, the ill-fitting suit, and the fact that I still can't quite believe the motion in front of me today. I'll admit that when I got sent a message on Facebook and asked to speak at the Union and told what the motion was, I had to read it over a few times just to check. My first reaction was fear that me coming up here making bad jokes would ruin my chance of ever getting on the Tab's top 50 BNOC list, which is so important to me. My second was trepidation that I didn't know how to use an iron, so I had to Skype my mum and ask her how to just get this so fresh. But my third, as I said, was disbelief at this motion. The Conservatives, demonised, unfairly, those words do not sound like they should fit together in any sentence. And I had to ask myself, has this noble institution, the Union, finally started to parody itself? So, like any student, I took to Google, and I Googled Conservatives demonised. Nothing came up. I Googled Conservatives treated badly. Nothing came up, so I Googled it again with a sad emoji face. No thanks. Nothing came up. Then I Googled Conservatives demonised Cambridge Union, and a whole lot came up. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, the Union have played a very clever trick on us tonight. So important is this debate to the Union, so important it is to work out just how demonised the Conservatives are, that not content with only debating it tonight, the Union also debated this very motion 4 years ago. And I would like to congratulate the Union on asking the important, vital questions that it seems the rest of the country already know the answer to. And I want to begin the case today, ladies and gentlemen, and say, no, the Conservatives are not unfairly demonised. But after I cancelled my supervision and ironed my shirt, I sat down and I thought about it. And I thought if I just traded insults for the next 5 or 6 minutes, it would confirm the proposition's case. So I really thought about it. And I thought there are some legitimate reasons for Conservatives to feel peeved. This is a party who's in the business of winning elections, getting over 11 million voters at the last election. Maybe if I was Conservative, I'd feel like I was due to be cut a bit of slack. Maybe I was a KUKA member who was really excited about going to one of their brilliant pork and cheese evenings, but tired of having to hide it from all my friends in college. Maybe I was a Conservative who was tired of the name-calling and wanted to look on the great Jeremy Corbyn's call for a kinder, gentler politics, as we heard before. But the motion this evening doesn't just invite us to talk about demonisation, it invites us to talk about unfair demonisation. And I want to put it to you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that all politicians, all political parties face a degree of demonisation, and that is part and parcel of politics. But unfair demonisation is not what I believe the Conservatives are in for. I believe that the demonisation the Conservatives face is justified, and I'm going to say why. Before I go on, I want to make it very clear that all politicians are to an extent demonised. In public, in private, whether having an affair or not having an affair, eating a bacon sandwich or not having a bacon sandwich, all politicians face face a level of scrutiny that is kind of healthy. But this motion invites us to go further. It invites us to look at the mighty Tory party and see them as victims rather than victors, powerless rather than powerful, bullied rather than the bully. And what I want to say to you today, ladies and gentlemen, is I want to ask you a very simple question. When you look at the Conservative Party today, do you see powerlessness? Do you see the bullied? Do you see victims? And I would hope, ladies and gentlemen, that the answer to that is no. And I want to start my case like all good Paper 6 historians. I hope there are some of you in this room. I know there's one over there. With Neil Kinnock. And Neil Kinnock said before one of his many election defeats, he said to the voters, if Mrs. Thatcher wins tomorrow, I warn you not to be ordinary. I warn you not to be young. I warn you not to fall ill, and I warn you not to get too old. And as someone who is both ordinary and young and sometimes ill, I can really sympathize with what he's saying. But what Mr. Kinnock was saying was that the Conservative Party, not necessarily through malice, but through generations of detrimental policies, generations of not listening, not looking to what they're doing to our country, that has divided this country, made this country more cruel, made this country a little less kind. And what he meant by that, ladies and gentlemen, was Hillsborough, was the poll tax, was Section 28, was I Have a Little List, the Tories of the 1980s launching a project of fear and division. Now, I'm well aware that it's not the 1980s anymore, and in a sense, we went through a different era. Who remembers the mid-2000s, the age of pop-punk and turkey twizzlers, and the youthful Jeremy Corbyn winning MP Beard of the Year? But also from the mid-2000s, we had Theresa May, No More Nasty Party. We had good lad David Cameron, Call Me Dave, hugging huskies, hugging hoodies, hugging anyone he could find, telling him that the Conservative Party had changed. It was a detoxified party, a different party, a new, happy party with a Treasures background. It feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? So that was 2006. What about 2016? I can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to change many people's minds about this government's record. But from where I'm looking, increasing child poverty, destroying our NHS, imposing contracts that junior doctors have time and time again said they do not want, exacerbating inequality, stigmatizing and demonizing those who rely on the welfare state. These are not the policies of a party who deserve our sympathy and a pat on the back and a hug. These are the policies of a party who, whether through malice or whether through recklessness, have sought to divide our country. And we heard in the first speech the argument along the lines of, well, look, let's talk about policy all we like, but let's not be mean to each other. And that argument could have some sway, but it's not the world we live in. And I think it's ironic that the Conservative Party, of all the parties, would moan about this, when it is the Conservative Party who trade in this sort of gutter politics more than any other. And to make that point, I want to speak very briefly about a hero of mine, a man by the name of Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband was, by all accounts, a very good and talented politician. He wanted to change Britain. He wanted to change Britain for the better. Lots of people disagreed with him. Lots of people agreed with him. And I would have found it okay if the Conservative Party went into the last election on James's call of a kinder, gentler politics, talking about where they had mild policy disagreements with Mr. Miliband. But instead, we didn't get that from the Conservatives and from the press, who are, by and large, owned by Conservatives. We had Ed Miliband being told off for eating a bacon sandwich. Ed Miliband being told off for drinking a cup of tea. Ed Miliband being told off for giving money to a homeless person, but not quite enough money. That was the slightly lighter side of things. But the more serious side of things, for me, came a month before the election, when the Defense Secretary Michael Fallon stole the headlines by warning that Ed would stab our country in the back, just like he had stabbed his brother. Now, aside, ladies and gentlemen, from the very, very dangerous line that treads in anti-Semitic smears of stabs in the back, which I've gone on record before talking about, what Mr. Fallon said there was a clear case of crossing the line that James so eloquently put out. And what makes it all the more worrying is it was not an isolated incident. This was part of the dark wizard or Grand Master Linton Crosby's plan that he called the dead cat strategy. The belief that if people are talking about the real issues that affects people's lives, all you have to do is hurl a dead cat into the middle of the room and everyone says, oh God, look, it's a dead cat. And what that showed was that this is a Conservative Party who are not only content with dividing the country and making sure some people win from their time in office and some people lose, but a party that is willing to blur the boundaries of what is right and what is wrong in politics. And so I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to bear this in mind when you vote on this motion tonight. And I want to remind you of the point I made at the beginning. When you see the modern Conservative Party and modern Conservative politicians, do you see the powerless or the powerful? Do you see victims or victors? I would contend, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a party that punches down, not punches up. A party that is here tonight to cry foul play when we have the audacity to show it for what it really is. I cannot resist, and I know that Andy can't either, I cannot resist a brief foray into football metaphors when it comes to politics. And I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, that tonight the Conservative Party would have us believe that we've got Jamie Vardy and Riyad Mahrez and Danny Drinkwater and the scrappy underdogs of Leicester City. But I would say, ladies and gentlemen, that actually they are the Chelsea FC of politics. Money, power, dirty tricks, and they always play in blue. And I would contend that when we see the modern Conservative Party, when we see what they've done to this country for generations, it is not our job to look at them and apologize for calling them out for the sorry, sorry party they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John T, and thank you particularly for pointing out what's a sorry person you'd have to be involved in setting unions at the, motions at the Cambridge Union, and B, to be on the THBT knock list. Really, it's been an honour. We shall now move to a round of floor speeches. So I will first ask for a speech in proposition of the motion. Do I have one? Yes.
Owen McCardle, St Catherine's College. Thank you, Madam President. I would actually like to stand up and make the Labour case for the proposition. Why Labour members in here, yes, I heard that, should vote against a Colk member, a peer of the realm, and a member of the Shadow Cabinet. And that is because I believe that, to continue the Chelsea metaphor, we're looking here at the league champions. Unless you've just emerged from under your rock, these people won the election last year. And to demonise the Tories is, for me, an insult to the voters who voted Tory, and that we would like to come back into the fold and vote Labour next time. I personally felt quite uncomfortable after the election to see people out in the streets protesting the result. Never mind the issue with the War Memorial, that was particularly unpleasant, and I don't want these people, I don't want to share a platform with them. But nonetheless, I do feel that stop demonising the Tories, start to understand why these people voted Tory. I know that Labour can do better. I know that if Andy were running the Department for Health now, we would not have a junior doctor strike. But you will only change that by understanding the concerns of Tory voters, why they're voting for the Tories, so we can bring them back on side and make sure that we have a Labour government in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. And do I have any speeches in opposition of the motion? Yes, down there.
Catherine Regler, St John's College. The proposition started off by talking about how it was sort of the left versus the right. And it made it sound very much like you were talking about politicians, and I apologise if I've... what I would say is that a demon is something that we fear or find scary, and you don't have to... it doesn't have to be that they're necessarily doing something wrong, as they might perceive it, the Conservatives. It's that people think that they are. And we don't have to be, just to pick up on your point, the majority. Like, we didn't have to be the majority voters to also feel like people are demons. So if a portion of the electorate, whether it's a majority or not, view the Conservatives as demons for what they perceive the Conservatives have done to them, whether it be closing the mines, taking away milk, or anything else, I think that it's totally fair that they view them as demons and therefore demonize them. And to say that they are being unfair because their concerns and their criticisms are unfounded and that they shouldn't believe them because, oh, this, and this, is to take away from the electorate something that's amazing, which is that we can think whatever the hell we want.
Thank you very much. It seems we have a reply from Mr. Hutt here.
I think there is an argument that can be had about policy. I'm not the expert on our side. We're going to hear more of that. What I want to point out, though, is the lazy introduction that our opening opposition speaker had, where in his very first description of the Tories, he described us as KUKA members going to port and policy. If that's how you want to characterise 11 million of your fellow Britons, fine, but you're completely out of touch with who votes Tory.
Giving a list of a number of scenarios of Conservative people, and I know that there are KUKA members who go to port and policy. I've seen them walking through the street, and I think we might know some here. I think it's a very good point that we don't want to demonize the 11 million people who voted Conservative, and that's something that I do sadly believe some people in the Labour Party might run the risk of doing. But the motion tonight invites us to look at the party, and the party, taken implied by that, means the people who work for it, the people who are MPs for it, the people who are pushing and designing its motions. I think it'd be a very different debate if we were looking solely at the people who vote Conservative, because I would always respect the wishes of the British people, and I think you can make a very clear distinction between the two.
I wouldn't usually do this, but since he's about to leave, James, right reply.
The word party. He uses the word the Conservatives. That's everyone.
Fair. Right, so on the questioning the motion section of the evening, which always happens, does anyone have a point in abstention of the motion? Yes, in the green over there.
Hi, Sarah Sheard, Hamilton College. I think this entire motion needs perspective. And for that, I'm going to ask that we all look over at the American election that's happening right now, where, yeah, I know we talked about the emergency debate and everyone's sick of it. But Ted Cruz, there is literally, I think it's 47% of voters in Florida believe that he could be the Zodiac killer. Like, they believe that Ted Cruz might have committed several murders in San Francisco in 1960 to 1965, despite the fact that Cruz was born in 1968. Like, if the Tories want to cry foul, if Labour wants to cry foul, that's fine by me, but at least no one is accusing you of being a serial killer. That's all I'm going to say.
Fantastic. I'm sensing people might have a bit more to say from the general mood in the room. So I have another point in proposition of the motion. I'm going to go to the KUKA gentleman in the corner. This will be fun.
Thanks, Charlotte. You just lost me all support in the entire chamber. Conor Monaghan, Fitzwilliam College. There's a fundamental distinction to be made between attacking the leaders of a party who deserve and expect to be attacked and attacking their supporters, who are ordinary people, mothers, fathers, teachers, ordinary workers who form our country. And that's something which the left consistently failed to do. The right do attack the leaders of Labour. They attack Ed Miliband in a very vicious and personal way. But the fact is, that is expected because Ed Miliband is a politician. People who support the Conservative Party are not politicians. They are ordinary people, and they do not deserve to be attacked in such a way. Thank you very much.
And do I have a point in opposition of the motion? Yes.
Thank you. I think we've heard a lot in the floor speeches.
Could you say your name and college?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Dominic Girton. I think we've heard a lot in the proposition floor speeches about demonisation of the Labour Party, whereas I think it's worth remembering that demonisation can go beyond political parties and towards social groups. When you look at the policies of the Conservatives towards people on benefits, people on zero-hours contracts, large sections of British society, quite often the language used in terms of scroungers and the language used against immigrants and other sort of, I suppose, vulnerable social groups, it quite often comes close, if not exceeding the sort of threshold for counting it as demonisation. So I think it's worth remembering that demonisation goes beyond party lines. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, a point on abstention. Yes, down there.
Forgive me if, Ash Nandi, Sydney Sussex College. Forgive me if I've completely understood the speakers so far on both sides, but it seems to me like you're arguing a slightly different motion. So on the proposition, it seems that the Conservatives covers the party, the politicians, the voters, but the opposition seems to be arguing that demonising the Conservatives is strictly limited to the party itself. So could we have some clarification on that point and get some unity in what we're actually arguing here?
Thank you very much. We now move on to our second speaker in proposition of the motion. Dr. Thérèse Coffey is a Conservative MP for Suffolk Coastal. She is an Assistant Government Whip and is now Deputy Leader of the House of Commons.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And it's my first time speaking in the Cambridge Union. It's a great pleasure to be here. All I can say is, so far we've heard from James and John T, and I'm sure Andy and Chris would agree with me, and Jerry, that both obviously politically ambitious and would do very well on the green benches in years to come. So, because we've heard so far some impassioned speeches, and dare I say it, I think I'm quite surprised to come to a union where there's you allow abstentions, because one of the things I believe in politics is that you have to choose, you have to make choices, you have to decide. And ultimately, those decisions can weigh heavily on the people you represent, even the people you don't represent, but the people you represent in a government. And nothing came true to that when we had the vote on Syria last year. And dare I say, I think the people who in the House decided not to vote, certainly their credibility when they spoke on the issue again, I think collapses, because you're not prepared to make a choice. And ultimately, that's what people elect us to do. Now, Madam President, you've been elected to have a fun summer term, Easter term, sorry. Forgive me, I'm using the opposite. I know. On background there. Easter term, when most students, instead of thinking about their exams, I'm sure will be drinking lots on the fine, doing a bit of punting, although I've been led to believe the fascist people are not allowing you to trail your bottles of wine in the cam anymore. But nevertheless, we have a big choice to make in the next few months, and that will be on the referendum. So I hope that one of the debates next term is there. But I think one of the things that I'm actually struck by what Owen said today, and I believe that people in this House tonight should vote for the motion if you believe in democracy. Because it is about respecting the fact that political parties put out there a choice for the electorate to make. Now, not everybody's going to agree with every single policy that you do or put forward, but this is one of the reasons why independents don't particularly fare well in politics in this country, because at least you have an understanding of the philosophy, the likely choices that will be made, and the electors make that choice. And perhaps surprisingly to the country, it was certainly surprising to the Prime Minister, they decided after 5 years of a coalition not to back Ed Miliband and the Labour Party, but to back David Cameron and the Conservative Party. And I think that's partly because of the experience that had happened in the years post-Tony Blair, and they decided to put their trust back in the Conservatives. Now, I think one of the things that might be an innovation in your term, if not for future presidents, may be to allow amendments to motions. And one of the amendments I might have suggested would be to add, this House believes the Conservatives and Tony Blair are unfairly demonised. And now part of the reason I say that is in today's political atmosphere, the Conservatives are actually taking the Tony Blair reforms, the new Labour reforms, further than Tony Blair took them, but essentially implementing them in full. Talk about academies, talking about patient choice in the NHS, talking about a number of activities. In fact, let's remember that for all but 13 days of a Labour government, the top rate of tax was 40%. Just for 13 days of a Labour government was at 50%. And yet we were attacked when we reduced it to 45%. And yet the figures show that it is actually generating more cash, more revenue, which is what we need to pay for things like our NHS. You know, I'm very proud that it was under a Conservative-led coalition government that we finally hit the 0.7% on international aid. And I can assure you that was not the most popular policy, with some people who would say they were natural Conservative supporters, especially when we'd had the worst peacetime deficit ever. And while elements, indeed unpopular policies that we did, like increasing tuition fees, were done at the same time as increasing international aid, in some ways you could say we made the wrong choice. I actually believe we made the right choice in order to help the poorest people around the world. And it's why I'm proud that alongside the decision we made on the 2nd of December last year to go into military intervention, that we can also say we are the second biggest donor to Syria and the camps in Lebanon, Jordan, and now Turkey. And indeed, after Germany, we are the second country in the EU to have rehomed and given a permanent home to Syrian refugees. I'd gladly give way.
Sarah Shea, Tom College, I spoke earlier. Is that why David Cameron referred to migrants as a swarm, literally dehumanizing and stripping away the humanity from people who have already lost so much? Cambridge has taken a complete total of, I think, 10 refugees so far. I'm just wondering what your response to that is.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister used that word. I think he used a different word. I think he used the word...
Let the speaker speak, please. Let the speaker speak.
I think he used the word bunch. So I think... But you may well be right. But nevertheless, I think you should ask your colleges then. Trinity College owns substantial amounts of money, generates millions of pounds from my constituency down in Felixstowe, the other end of the A14. And I think if you are concerned about the fact that Cambridge has only taken in 10 refugees, then you might want to consider what such a wealthy city like Cambridge with this university can do to potentially house more. You may even want to think about what you want to use this building for potentially in the future. So coming back to that, I think one of the things that does get a bit difficult in debates is the hyperbole. Now, I have to say, inside the chamber, Madam President, in Parliament, it really matters. We have legislation that we're debating or opposition day debates, and we are passionate about what we do and about people's lives. And it's why we can go hell for leather against each other, because it does matter. It does matter. But I have to say, outside, this may come as a bit of a surprise to you, Madam President. Actually, members of Parliament do actually work together to get things done. Whether that's in all-party groups, whether that's in social life, whether it's about even things like the Hillsborough Inquiry. So I will pay tribute to Andy. I have to say, he is a true blue, who, of course, is red in politics. I'm a true red, and I'm still desperately wanting to know what the Liverpool Man U score is tonight. I'm Liverpool, by the way. But a true blue in politics. And we both grew up, I grew up in Liverpool, and Andy grew up just down the road. But we're united by our sense in terms of justice that we wanted to find. And I'll give credit to Andy for initiating that inquiry, and I know he will give credit to Theresa May for the extension of that. Because actually there are things that unite us in ensuring that things are there in terms of social justice. Now, I think one of the things that was referred to earlier is about Ed Miliband. And I think, a bit like tonight, people can get very comfortable in a kind of an environment like this. They can get very comfortable in a social media environment where it's effectively an echo chamber and people are talking to each other. But the reality is that one of the reasons I became a Conservative is because at the time in Liverpool when we had a guy called Derek Hatton, probably it's in modern history, political textbooks nowadays, I went the other way. I became a Conservative because I felt that there was a better way to choose than bankrupting a city in which I had grown up and be proud. But I want to help people every stage of their life, whether that's about improving childcare, good schools, over 1.6 million children in a good or outstanding school, more so than in 2010. Whether it's about trying to help people when they go to get a job and an apprenticeship, whether it's about support for business investment while tackling the tax avoidance, keeping more of what you earn, especially the 4 million people that we have taken out of paying income tax altogether. Through the richest are now paying more tax than before. And in contrast to what you said, I'm afraid the facts are there. Actually, income inequality has fallen. The rich are paying more tax. There are 680,000 fewer workless households. There are, in the measure that was used throughout the Labour government, there are 50,000 more children out of poverty in comparison. The fact that when you fall ill any day of the week, the highest funding the NHS has ever enjoyed is under this Conservative government. Now, Andy will have said, there's only one day left, the day before the election, there's only one day left to save the NHS. The NHS is treating more people than ever before. It's had more funding than ever before. The Conservatives chose to put £8 billion. In fact, we've put £10 billion by the end of this Parliament on an annual basis to ensure that more people can be treated than ever before. And as a consequence, I find it very difficult when people try and say that we hate the NHS. Actually, we're there. I recognise we may disagree on some of the priorities and how things are done. But nevertheless, I would like to think, and I do believe Andy really believes this, we're both interested in what's best for the patient, and I'm determined, and it's been one of my big features of being a politician. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. But I just want to ask you a simple question, Thérèse. Has satisfaction with the National Health Service risen or fallen under your government?
To be open, Andy, I don't know what the latest survey is. I don't. I'm going to say you're going to say it's fallen. That's okay. But nevertheless, the Labour Party. Well, you may be right. I don't. I'm sure you wouldn't ask if you didn't know the answer. What I will say is that the Labour Party decided to only put £3 billion in their manifesto. We went for the full 8 that the chief executive said he needed in order to make his NHS plan work. And by the way, this is somebody who used to work for Tony Blair. So, dignity in retirement, restoring the earnings link. Of course, dare I say it, you're all very young, and you've got a wonderful lifetime ahead of you. But I want to really stress that I bear no ill will to the Labour Party, but I do think they got things badly wrong. Of course, there were some crashes which were not necessarily of their making, but I don't think that they were prepared for the shocks that came and spend money like there was no tomorrow. Everything that we try and do has to be underpinned by shaping a healthy economy, being achieved, I believe, by our long-term economic plan. It's not immune from international shocks, but nor is sticking your head in the sand and spending like there's no tomorrow the best way to protect not only your generation, but also the people behind you. I've got less than a minute to go, Andy. You're about to have your say. It is about ensuring that the generations of today, but also the generations of future, by investing in infrastructure, investing in skills, and allowing great universities like this to truly flourish. No wonder the fact that inward investment is increasing. No wonder, dare I say it, that the Conservative government was re-elected. And I'm pretty confident that we'll get re-elected in 2020. Thank you, Madam President.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to call the second speaker for the opposition. Lord Chris Smith is a life peer in the House of Lords and a former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. He is also the Master of Pembroke College, which happens to be my college, and I would like to take this opportunity in all sincerity to say that Lord Smith has been one of the best things that's happened to Pembroke in my time there, and he has been a truly wonderful master, and I'm delighted he's here. Not quite as delighted as he might be that he is here, given that tonight is Pembroke Bop, which was described to me by one of the organising committee as an absolute nightmare waiting to happen. So, Chris, you're safe now.
Madam President, Charlotte, can I begin by congratulating you very warmly on taking this great office? And can I also congratulate James on a formidable term here as President? And I would just gently observe that all the best presidents come from Pembroke. There's an old story, you can tell it's quite old by the cast of characters, about three world leaders who are arguing amongst themselves as to which is the oldest nationality in the world. And the first, who is François Mitterrand, says, well, the first people in the world were Adam and Eve. There they were, two naked lovers making love under a tree in a garden. Very romantic situation. They must have been French. Mikhail Gorbachev, who was there as well, said, no, you're not right. There they are, two comrades in the garden, sharing an apple equally between them. They must have been Russian. You silly boys, said Margaret Thatcher, who was with them. There they are, nowhere to live, nothing to wear, virtually nothing to eat, and think they're in paradise. They must be British. Now, of course, this debate has focused, as far as it's focused at all, around this issue of, are we talking about the Conservative Party, the leadership of the Conservative Party, the things that the Conservative Party put in front of the people, the decisions they make in government, or are we talking about the millions of Conservative voters? To make any common sense of this motion, we are talking about the party, the government, the leaders of the party, because the millions of voters, they are simply beguiled by what they are told. They follow, they don't make the policies, they don't make the decisions, they don't do the things that governments do, and those are the tests that we have to use.
I'm perfectly prepared to accept your interpretation of the motion, but it doesn't fill me with confidence that you're not prepared to take the higher bar, which is the Conservatives throughout the country, and defend that.
I'm about to do precisely that. Because, of course, what happened at the election was the Conservatives had a completely brilliant story to tell to the electorate. They said, here was the Labour government, it crashed the economy, it borrowed far too much money, it left the country in debt. We, the Conservatives, have come in and we are in the process of sorting it out. For heaven's sake, don't let them back in again. Very, very simple narrative. Millions of people believed it and voted for it. Those are your voters, James. It is, of course, complete baloney. It is an absolute canard that they have repeated and repeated and repeated, and Thérèse made a little bit of this in the course of her speech as well. They've been absolutely on message from day one. Every single opportunity, they've said, Labour caused the economic crash, we're sorting it out. Labour didn't cause the economic crash. The world banking system caused the economic crash. Labour didn't sort it out. When Labour left office, the deficit was coming down, the economy was growing, and employment was going up. The moment that the Conservatives came in, they slammed the brakes on. And that decision to opt immediately for severe austerity, when actually the complete reverse was what was needed, that set us back by years. So let's not have too much about how it's the Conservative voters that are being demonised. It's the Conservative Party and its leaders that need to be demonised because of the story that they have told to the electorate. Yes.
Daniel Hyman, Sydney, Sussex. You could also do a parallel with the SNP in Scotland, and yet we're not here tonight saying the SNP have been unfairly demonised, whereas the SNP have been going on about independence, and all the opposition have been saying about not independence, and then when the SNP have been in Holyrood, all they've been focusing on is independence to the detriment of Scotland.
I would make absolutely that argument about the SNP. Yes, indeed. The rhetoric of the SNP leadership is very much at odds with what they have actually achieved in government, what they've actually been doing. And if I was applying this sort of motion to the SNP, I would be looking at precisely what they're doing. And that is what I am about to go on to do. Not with the SNP, but with the Conservatives. Because, as Theresa May, of course, famously said, they are the nasty party. You have only to look at some of what has happened. They are the party that imposed the bedroom tax, that drives people out of the homes they've lived in for years. And when parents with a disabled child take the government to court because of the needs of the disabled child and win in court, the court says you should keep your extra bedroom. What do the government do? They appeal. They say, we don't agree with the court. We still want to take that bedroom off them. And you tell me they're not still the nasty party? They're the party that hires a dodgy company to declare disabled people fit to work in their thousands, forcing them back to work. In 2 years, nearly 2,500 of them have died. They were so fit to work that their disability led to their death. They're the party...
I'm not disputing the figures you've just outlined, but could you confirm that Atos was actually also engaged by the Labour government in doing the same test?
Yes, they were. And the fact that mistakes are made by one party doesn't necessarily exonerate the other. However, it's the whole record that you need to look at. And also, I would actually point out that the rules which Atos had to implement under Labour were very different from the rules that they have to implement now under the Conservatives. This is the party that has cut funding for local government by 30% since 2010. It's set to fall a further 56% over the course of the next 3 years. This means children's centres, libraries, elderly care, even potholes in the roads are not going to survive. They'll say, but we've brought in £300 million of relief, specially to help councils to survive the cuts that are going to be imposed. 83% of the 300 million is going to Conservative councils. The council that does best out of the new relief is Surrey. The 5 most deprived councils in the entire country will get absolutely nothing out of the relief. This is the... Yeah.
In Wales, the Labour government also seem to be giving the worst deal to the councils where Labour have no hope of being elected. It's not just a Tory, it's not good what the Tories are doing, but it's not just a Tory problem.
I would dispute your analysis in Wales, but what I would also say is that Wales is, of course, entirely constrained by the block grant which it gets decided by the Conservative government. This is the party that has been starving the health service of funds. Now, Thérèse said, of course, they've been very generous. They've given the health service the most it's ever had. Well, of course they've given the health service the most it's ever had. That happens every single year as funding rises with inflation. But if you look at the past 50 years of funding for the health service, for most of that period, funding rose by an average of 3% in real terms every year. Because the health service has to do that, because of the number of elderly people is increasing, because medical technology is increasing, because wages tend to rise by more than inflation, and the great bulk of health service expenditure is wages. Of course, it rises. Over the course of the last 6 years, it's been flatlining. And what we are seeing now is the consequence of that. And on top of all of that, they are now trying to impose a contract on junior doctors, which junior doctors themselves say is going to imperil not their livelihood, but is going to imperil safety. And that is serious. Not content with driving doctors out of the health service, they're driving teachers out of teaching. Over 500,000 children are now being taught in classes of more than 30. And on top of all of this, you're still telling me they're not the nasty party. On top of all of this, this is a party that calls a huddled mass of desperate men, women, and children, especially children, in Calais, a bunch of migrants. And they refuse even to do something to bring the children here in a kindertransport of a modern age. But of course, it's not just the individual issues and policies, not just the things that the Conservative government is doing that means they live up to the judgment of being the nasty party. It's what they stand for as a party. They believe that there is no such thing as society. No community, no collaboration, no workers joining together, no collective support for the individual citizen. Government activity to support society is not what they believe in. They believe that the government's job is primarily to get out of the way of the citizen. I believe that the government's job is not to interfere, not to intrude, but to support, to provide a platform on which individuals can grow, can thrive, can develop to their full potential. I believe that our society isn't selfish and divided and shouldn't be unequal, with people only working for their own individual self-interest. That we need to work together for the good of all. That's built into my political fundamental belief. It is not built into conservative fundamental political belief. They believe ultimately in the needs, the aspirations, and the welfare of the individual. It's an honourable belief. Of course it's an honourable belief. But it is not my belief, because I believe that the individual thrives best when surrounded and supported by a community working together. And, no, because I have to draw to a close, I'm afraid. So, do I demonize them? Yes, I demonize them. I demonize them for what they are doing to the poor, to the desperate, to the lonely, to the refugees. I demonize them, however, also for that fundamental refusal to believe in collective action and support, which is the only way in which any of us ultimately will survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Smith. Looking at the Twitter feed, it broadly divides into two main categories, criticism of the Conservative Party and praise for the outgoing president's socks. So it's good to know that everyone is taking the debate seriously. One might say that I have very big shoes to fill. In the words of Nick Clegg, I'm sorry. Our next speaker in proposition of the motion is Jerry Hayes. Jerry was a Conservative MP for 14 years, during which time he served on the Health and Heritage Select Committee, was PPS in a Northern Ireland office, and Department of Environment, and when asked whether he would join Blair's New Labour, said no, because it's too right-wing. Jerry.
Thank you, Madam President. What has rather distressed me about your introduction is there is no mention of the book I'm trying to flog. Why on earth do you think I'm here? Do you want to think I want to talk about the bloody Tory party? I'm here to sell my book, which is An Unexpected MP, which was a bestseller in, well, it was in South America, so 5 drunken tribesmen bought it. And even better, in chapter 2, there is a story of Margaret Thatcher, Willie Whitelaw, and anal sex. $15.99 on Amazon. What more have you got? Now, I apologise for being so scruffy, but I've been defending senseless violence in the Croydon Crown Court. Now, I'll get back to the Tory party in a minute. But Chris, we were elected together in 1983, and like Andy, you're one of the nicest guys in politics. But what you said a moment ago was all the reasons why you lost the last general election. You used the Egyptian defense. Does anyone know what the Egyptian defense is? You're in denial. You could not accept that you could not accept that you got it wrong. And oh, yes, no, we didn't mess it up. Yes, the bankers would behave wickedly. But remember that speech from Ed Balls. What did he say at the Lord Mayor's banquet? Let's have light touch regulation. And look what happened as a result. Well, I agree with much of what James said in his speech, in fact, probably everything. But what really worries me of what is happening in politics at the moment, which is not happening to the Tory party too much, politics can be terribly unfair. The real demonisation is from what is happening in the Labour Party. When you get decent people like Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall, who are being accused of red scum. You've got Momentum who are infiltrating every branch. You've got a decent man like Jeremy Corbyn, and he is, but with some very bad friends. Seamus Milne, we used to call him because he was so dreadful, Shameless Milne. He's got some bad friends as well. The demonisation, which is so utterly disgusting, is happening not to the Tories, but to you people. So, Andy, I'm not going to be unkind to you tonight. I mean, you're a nice guy, and it'd be like strangling the Andrex puppy, wouldn't it, really? I mean, you know, how could I do such a thing? Anyway, let's get back. yeah, you've got the last word, haven't you? Right. The shooting season of Tories has officially begun, and of course it's blue on blue, isn't it? The trouble with the Tory party is that we have 3 gears, and that is complacency, panic, and self-destruct. Now, we are a broad church. Well, it's wonderful, but my God, we are very, very broad indeed. We cross whole galaxies. And in the pews, there's some very strange people. Anyone with a bone in their name, Peter Hollowbone, Philip, anyone with a bone in the name, very, very dangerous indeed. You've got the evangelicals. You've got the snake wrestlers. You've got all sorts, and you've got those with the gift of tongues. If only they would actually hold their tongues. Which reminds me, is there anyone from Jesus? I don't mean from Jesus, obviously, because that would be a great story. Anyone from Jesus? Anyone from Jesus? Oh, James Pascoe. James Pascoe from here. Now, there's a cock story here, isn't there? Somewhere. Wasn't I reading in the Times the other day that you're discussing removing a great cock? Is that right? Well, look, could you do something about Boris Johnson? Because I think, that would be really helpful, wouldn't it, to everybody? The trouble with the Tory party is a little bit like Macbeth without the jokes. But I'm afraid Labour at the moment makes Titus Andronicus look like a comedy, a Whitehall farce. But it's desperately sad, and I am genuinely sincere about this, because unless you have a strong opposition, you have a government which is too powerful. And there isn't a strong opposition at the moment because of the various messages. And Andy, you know this. You saddle with the boy, unless someone kills him. And Tom Watson's a big boy. You've got him, mate. But never mind. Let's go back to the Tories. Now, it's rather, I think, vaguely interesting. The Amish wing of the Tories, as I like to call them, are still mourning the political death of Margaret Thatcher. Whereas the new, kind, caring Labour Party, who are not terribly kind and care to Blairites, are trying to put their most successful leader in winning elections, Tony Blair, in the dock for war crimes. How insane is that? And you're right, madam, about the right-wing thing. In fact, Tony came up... Go on, yes.
Just on a point of information, he may have been the most successful leader the Labour Party ever had. He happened to be spectacularly wrong on Iraq.
Well, he was spectacularly wrong in Iraq. But I'll tell you this, you and I were elected with Tony Blair. I thought he was spectacularly wrong. But he did it for what he genuinely believes was the right reasons. He genuinely believed he was right. I think he was totally wrong, and I wouldn't have voted for it. But at least his heart was in the right place, even if his brain wasn't in gear. So anyway, the Labour Party are not the Tories' worst enemy. We're our own worst enemy. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in the stars, but in ourselves. So, now, there was something profound I was going to say. Oh, was that you, Chris? That's what it was. You have sinned. You have sinned. You've given us Emily Thornberry. Emily Thornberry, the shadow secretary. Putin is shaking in his shoes. Press the nuclear button, and City and Sweep whiz up into the atmosphere. Now, this is the bit, I'm afraid, Thérèse, as we're on television. You've got to shake your head, and you've got to say what I'm saying is total rubbish. Of course, which is totally true. Firstly, the juddering, sphincter-rattling incompetence of Emily Thornberry is only second to Chris Grayling. Oh, I know. We call him Chuckles in the House of Commons. We really do. He is our barrel load of laughs, except, and the poor, Thérèse, you must shake your head at this. You really must. Well, look, he's going to be dead in 2 weeks' time politically, isn't he? He's political roadkill, so it doesn't matter. You can shake your head. But the fact of the matter is, Grayling. I know he's your boss. Do you know, I'll tell you something which you haven't done. I spent a whole afternoon with my head up his arse. I did, because I went on a demonstration with what he was doing to the bar, legal aid and all the rest of it. And I had to carry around this paper mache, statue of Grayling with my head up his arse. Now, who can say in this room that they've had their head up Chris Grayling's arse? Not a pretty thought, but I mean, of course, I've got 1 minute. Oh God, 1 minute to go. and so much to do. Anyway, Chris Grayling, that little funster, unfortunately jokes which she has to listen to, as she did today, is no laughing matter for Chris. And you're not going to drown in his gene pool either. Let's just get the nice, nasty bits out of the way. So, the trouble with the Tory party is within itself. We have people, the Lederhosen wing, if you'd like to call them, they are wrong on every major issue. They were wrong on same-sex marriage. They're wrong on Europe. There's not a sensible issue. They're on the correct side of them. You know, Sunday training. We went all through this in the 1980s, in the 1990s. Provided workers are protected, why not? Why behave in this way? But of course, there are too many Christians and not enough lions. Now, thank you very much. And then finally, I've just got to mention the last bit. I mean, there are some seriously weird people who you would not stand next to when there's a full moon. Priti Patel, she still believes in a death penalty. Bill Cash, oh dear. You know, it's pretty scary stuff. Well, you've got bigger problems than me, mate. Well, you haven't got Donald Trump. But there we are. So, I suppose I better support this motion. I commend it to the House.
Thank you, Jerry, for what I think we are all agreed was one of the most extraordinary speeches I have ever heard in this house. And a rare win for anyone who has the word sphincter on their Cambridge Union bingo card tonight. I would like to welcome the final speaker for the opposition, Andy Burnham. Andy has been the Labour MP for Ley since 2001 and is currently the Shadow Home Secretary. He was also my childhood hero, which I think says more about my childhood than anything else. Andy.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Hello. Thank you, everybody. And congratulations. Madam, I feel under pressure now, Madam President. I might disappoint those childhood dreams that you had. And I think so. And Jerry, how do I follow that tour de force? I mean, how do I spent all last year getting beaten up by an older man with white hair and a beard, and you're going to do it to me again tonight. It's not fair. I've had that so many times before. But here I am to show there's life after a Labour leadership election. But also here I am, hopefully, to win for Labour. Because by God, we need some victories right now. And if you're in the market for a sympathy vote, I'll take it, I'll have it, because we could do with a win. We've got an uphill struggle, let's be honest, because we have heard three fantastic speakers this evening. And our difficulty is on this side of the debate is they're the decent face of the Tory party. But the thing I'd say is don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. The Tory party has other faces than this. They are the decent ones. But I'm come on to explain there are many other faces that you need to look at as well. As other speakers have said, I think James said this at the very start of the debate, demonisation is part of politics. So is its kind of more affable cousin ridicule. It's part of it. You try and exaggerate the other side to make your point. That's part of political to and fro, the stock in trade of politics. And I saw it myself, I think, as Jerry said in the summer. What was I? I was the flip-flopper. I was mascara man. Going to come back to your thing in a minute. Oh, yes, very relevant to this debate tonight. I was a red Tory. And in certain circles, in Labour circles, that is the ultimate term of abuse. And why is it? That's the point, isn't it, tonight? That's what we've got to get to. Why is that term, Tory, in certain places, by certain people, why is it uttered with such real feeling of contempt inside? Why? That's what we've got to get to. And is it fair that they feel that people who feel that way, is it fair? That's the question that you've all got to decide this evening. James was right at the very beginning to say that people shouldn't be pilloried or demonized for their policy choices. Absolutely correct. And I agree with him, and I think Thérèse made a similar point. So I'm not going to do that tonight. That's not my case to you tonight, the thesis I'm going to put to you all tonight. I'm not going to argue about their policy choices. No, I'm going to do something different tonight. The Andrex puppy is going to go for the jugular. I won't forgive you for that. I'm going to argue something different. Their crime for me that justifies their demonization is different. Their crime for me is to go against what a responsible political party should do when they're in government. When you're in government, you should be to govern for everybody, for the whole country, to be a unifying government, to be able to reach out across divides. That's what a good government should do. That is proper government if you were to look at the best governments there have been in any country around the world. Nelson Mandela would be the classic example of somebody who was able to put those any bitterness aside and reach out to your others. My point to you tonight is that that isn't what they do. Their crime is this. When they're in government, they are, as Jonty said, the bully. That is what they do. They seek confrontation. They do punch down. They take on the vulnerable and take them on to make political points in their own interest. That is what they do. That is what they have done throughout my life. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So I want to put evidence behind this claim that that is their crime. So I do want to talk about the 1980s, that decade that was my formative decade in terms of me and my life. I lived through that decade in the northwest of England. And really, you had to be there to feel it, to feel what was going on. Because it began with riots in Toxteth, Moss Side, but other parts of the country as well. It was a divisive decade. There was a program, Boys from the Black Stuff, on the television about, as Chris was saying, cruel changes to benefits, punishing those who couldn't get a job. They were just told to get on their bike, even though there was no work. But it got worse in the 1980s. Minority groups were taken on to make political points to police certain newspapers. So, Section 28, not really been mentioned tonight, but that was a clause in legislation which banned schools from, in the words of the clause, promoting homosexuality. That's what it did. In effect, it encourages schools not to recognize the basic equality of all young people. It was discriminatory in its effect. That's what it did. Imagine what it would have made a young gay person growing up in a tough part of the country. Imagine how that would have made them feel. That is what they did. Think about apartheid in that era. They supported the regime. They wouldn't impose sanctions. They denigrated Nelson Mandela. Young conservatives, so I'm sure they're a better breed these days. I can see that they are. But they had hang Nelson Mandela parties when I was here at this university. That is what they did. Think about that. That is what they did. Think about the miners' strike. The miners' strike. That wasn't about the issue, the policy issue. Thatcher wanted that. She wanted that dispute. It was the fight to end all fights with the trade unions. She was going to beat them. She got the police to be her political wing, going around the country, breaking up miners' disputes. That is what they did. And I'm going to come to the kind of main charge I'm going to lay at their door, and Thérèse mentioned it earlier, because it is so personal to me. I was at this university in 1988. I arrived here. Easter term, like you now, coming up to your Easter term, I went home at Easter 1989, back home to the people I'd grown up with. Everton and Liverpool were in 2 FA Cup semi-finals while I was at home from Cambridge in those Easter holidays. The night before the game, I was going to watch Everton. They were watching Liverpool. We were all chatting in the pub. I was saying to them, careful at Hillsborough. The ground's unsafe. I've been there myself. The pens, it's terrible. Yeah, we chatted away. We went off to the game. I went to my game. Scoreboard at Villa Park, 4 dead at Hillsborough. Well, what's going on here? We get home. I go back to the same pub where I've been with my friends the night before, and they came back one by one in varying states of trauma. And I mean trauma. Blank behind the eyes. They'd witnessed hell on earth. They had witnessed hell on earth. These were my friends, the people I had grown up with. And what happened? 2 or 3 days later, I won't name it. You know which newspaper it is. The Truth. Liverpool fans urinated on the dead. Liverpool fans robbed the dead. The Prime Minister's official spokesman, Sir Bernard Ingham, said it was all down to a tanked-up mob. Why were they doing that? Because the police wanted to put the blame on the Liverpool supporters, the South Yorkshire police, the same police force that had helped them out over the miners' strike and at Orgreave, where that police force had helped Margaret Thatcher take on the miners in the greatest showdown of the miners' strike. Then they came back at the end of the 1980s and they wanted the government's help, and they said it was a tanked-up mob. So, at the moment of my home city's greatest grief, at that moment, they chose to denigrate the dead, the bereaved, the traumatized. That is what they did. And I can't tell you what incalculable harm that has caused in the decades since Hillsborough. I lived through that and I felt it. That wasn't people I don't know. That was my friends. That was who I grew up with. And I will say to Thérèse, like, they have changed, and I do give credit to this government. They were prepared to work with me to tell the truth about it. So this generation, I don't think, is as bad, actually, as the Tory party of the 1980s. But that is what happened. And the point that I'm going to come to now in terms of backing up my thesis that they take on people, it's not all historical what I'm talking to you about tonight. It's happened again, hasn't it? It's happened again, and we've heard about it tonight. They've come into government, and the old playbook comes out. Divide, confront, bully. Chris and Jonty have mentioned so many examples. The bedroom tax example, you could almost say we rest our case on that alone. But no, there's more. There's more. They have said, oh, you're not working, you're a skiver. There's strivers in society, and there's skivers. And I can tell you, in my constituency surgery, they have made people on benefits weep with feelings of shame and inadequacy because they are receiving a benefit through absolutely no fault of their own. They've divided people and made some people feel like second-class citizens in their own country. It is unforgivable. They did call refugees a swarm, Thérèse. I'm sorry.
Somebody at my school died at Hillsborough. I actually find it quite distasteful that you're trying to effectively pin what happened at Hillsborough on the Conservatives and demonising as a consequence. But I think what is accurate to say is that I cannot find a Labour MP who can find a Conservative MP that has used that term about people who claim welfare, the term of skiver. I'd be really grateful if he could say that tonight. But I'm very confident to say that this party, the party I represent, does believe that you will be better off in work, or should be better off in work, than if you don't work unless you cannot work. And as a consequence, that's why I do support the welfare reforms. I recognise what he might say about some difficulties on bedroom tax. But nevertheless, shifting the system to ensure that we encourage people to get on with their lives, I think is the right thing for government to do, and not simply to treat the causes, the symptoms of the issue, but to treat the causes.
Well, let me take the first part of your question, Thérèse. I am going to tell the truth about Hillsborough. You've got to tell the truth. And the truth about it is, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said what he said. Tory MPs, and I can name them, Jerry probably will know them, briefed the newspapers. Shrewsbury, one of them was called. They did it. You cannot just say that. I've admitted that Labour Party didn't do enough to challenge it, actually. So we're culpable too, and I would be the first to say that. But let's tell the truth. I gave you credit, if you were listening, for what you had done, what this government had done, holding a mirror up to all of that. But let's have it as it was. The families don't need political fixes and glossing over. They deserve the truth. Nothing else. That's what they should get. And in terms of, yeah, I have heard them use those phrases, skiver. And if you're saying you haven't, then, I don't know. You know, Linton Crosby's handbook was based on that kind of invective. And this is my point. It's not historical. They are slightly better. They're not as directly confrontational and nasty, in my view, as Margaret Thatcher was. But they have done these things. They have demonized trade unions, actually, themselves. They demonize trade unions. That's their daily job. They have a bill going through Parliament that almost completely undermines the trade union movement because they are vindictively, in my view, trying to pull apart parts of British civic life that underpin the opposition. And they are acting vindictively again in government. That is what they do. And look at, I don't know if there are any medics in this room, but look at what they're doing to junior doctors. Look at what, it's wrong picking a fight in that way with young people who are, Jeremy Hunt, I always have to be careful how I say that name, who are working weekends. Don't tell me they're not. They are. They're the backbone of the NHS, and you're picking a fight with young people, with university fees, with all the challenges that they've got in life, and you're trying to pick a fight with them. It is wrong. I just ask you to consider the 18 years of Tory government and the 6 you've had under the coalition, and the 13 years of the Labour government. When was more social unrest, unhappiness, division in society? Was there more in those 2 spells of Tory government, or was there more when we were in government? We weren't perfect. We made many mistakes, and we've touched on some of them tonight. Chris mentioned one of them. We made many mistakes, but there were fewer strikes. People generally had a better standard of living. The society we were living in was more open and tolerant. We brought in civil partnerships. We tackled racism in the Metropolitan Police. We made this country, I would say, happier, fairer, more optimistic. And that's my case to you tonight. They have this leopard of the Tory party hasn't changed its spots. It has always been like this. It's done it through history. In the 1960s, they fought a by-election. They fought a by-election on the phrase, if you want a coloured, actually they used a different word, but I'll say that tonight. If you want a coloured for a neighbour, vote Labour. That's what they said. Think about that. That is what this party that has stood on in the past. That is who they are. That's what they've been. I don't say they're all wrong, bad people. They're not. There are many very decent Tories in Parliament. But those who write the tactics for them, they have in the past deliberately sought to pick on the vulnerable to make their political points. And by God, this is a ruthless party. This is a ruthless party that is capable of acting with utter callousness in pursuit of its own interests. And others have mentioned it, and I will finish on it tonight. She said this, our base is too narrow, and so occasionally are our sympathies. You know what some people call us, the nasty party. My opposite number in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, she's right on many things, and she was right there. And I can't make any further case to you tonight. When your opposite number in Parliament agrees with you, clearly we have won this debate tonight that says the Tory party, through history, through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, and now have demonized the vulnerable in our society. And because of that, that's how people feel about them. In Scotland, where they piloted the poll tax, in those mining communities that have still never recovered, and, of course, in the city of Liverpool. Ask them there what they think about the Tories. It used to be a Tory city, believe it or not, going back a few decades. It's not anymore. They don't feel the Tories have been unfairly demonized. They don't feel they've been held enough to account. And that's why I say tonight, you should vote for this motion and send them a message so they reflect on it and they actually do pursue a better kind of politics in the future. Thank you.